And this election, we are now just 2 weeks away from the day that counts, that big election day with control of Congress and many governors' mansions on the line here. Let's check in on some of the key races across America.
And to do that, let's bring in our political analyst, Mr. Tom Seraphin. Tom, good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so which of the state Senate races are you keeping your eyes on and think are key here? We've been talking about Pennsylvania, we've been talking about Ohio, we've talked about Georgia.
Well, just north of us, Ron Johnson, he's always had a tough election, 2010, 16, and now. But he started out with the Tea Party in 10 and 16 was Trump. This year, he's got this big Republican wave around the country. He's surprising a lot of people right now. He was the underdog, but he's up by 5 points, which is surprising. And you talk about Pennsylvania. You've got Featherman and Dr. Oz. You had the big debate last night. I watched that thing. I cringed for Mr. Featherman. He's a decent guy. He should never have been on the debate stage. He's suffering from the results of a stroke, and I don't think his people and his handlers were very good to him by putting him on that stage last night. It looks like a Dr. Oz victory there in Pennsylvania. It looks like a Ron Johnson victory right now in Wisconsin, unless something turns around there. And Van, the job in Ohio, that's a big race. You got J.D. Vance and Tim Ryan. That should have been, a closer race than it is. After that debate last week, J.D. Vance has pulled away. He's up by 4 points right now. And, an interesting race is in Arizona. Kari Lake, who is also one of those Republicans that people thought on the Democratic side they should push in a primary because she'd never win in a general, is now up by 5 points in the polls. She is a kind of a Mama Trump, but just taking the storm. And national people are watching that race because she is a star about to be born in 2 weeks. Amazing contest there.
And Tom, what's really interesting to me about that Kari Lake and so many other contests is she's one of those people who has denied the results of the 2020 election or questioned them strongly. She, of course, was endorsed by Trump. How big of that is in this election season? Because so many people are running that are denying what happened in the 2020 election.
Well, that's become part of the kind of rhetoric going back and forth. Was it stolen? Was it rigged? Did people move ballots here and there? That's been part of the contest. And right now, because of this huge Republican wave moving around the country, people like Kari Lake are being successful. The result of that is after the election on Tuesday, if she does win and others like her win, Donald Trump will try to take a lot of the credit for it, which puts him in a good position to be on the ticket in 24. I think there's a lot more to it than that. I don't think Donald Trump can claim that kind of victory. But, the more Donald Trump is on the front pages right now in the next 2 weeks, that helps Democrats turn out the vote because he's electric. Democrats are not coming out in the numbers they need to. Enthusiasm, which is much greater now with the Republicans than the Democrats, is the biggest problem that Democrats have right now. In the generic ballot vote, where people are asked, would you pick a Republican or a Democrat to represent you in Congress today? 4% are now saying Republicans, which is extraordinarily high, just because there are more Ds than there are Rs. And historically, that's only been a vacillation of 3 or 4 points, one way or the other. And Democrats usually have dominated that. It's an extraordinary election season right now.
Tom, it sounds like you would be surprised if it wasn't a Republican wave in a couple of weeks. What factors do you think are driving this?
Inflation, the economy, that's the number one issue everywhere. People thought after the Dobbs election, abortion would rank there. New York Times had their poll a week ago, shocked people all over the country. Abortion was at 5%. The economy and inflation were at 25, 26%. Also, crime is up there in the top 5 issues that people are talking about. Also, people are concerned about preserving democracy. But out of those top 5, it's all about inflation. If you ask people, are they happy or are they satisfied with what's going on in the country? 70% say no. The biggest top 2 concerns for people today, 65% of the country say groceries. Groceries and the price of gas are their number 1 concerns, number 1 and number 2 concerns, 65%. So it's all about the pocketbook. 25% of people's 401ks have disappeared. People are very, very worried about where they're going to eat next.
We are almost out of time, but I want to ask you about another race that's close to us. The Michigan governor. Abortion came up. That was a big issue last night, and a lot of those you just mentioned. What do you think is going to happen there in the Michigan governor's race?
That's an interesting one. Governor Whitmer should win that race, but the opponent there has done a heck of a job, dealing with the pipeline issue that the Governor Whitmer wants to close up in that area, and also the highways. Those are big issues in Michigan right now. I expected Whitmer to win. Right now, she's within the margin of error. She's up by 3 points on an average of the polls. One poll came out today and said it was statistically tied. I don't know how that's going to break. Everybody. A lot of people didn't give her opponent Dixon, the kind of credit that she needed early on, but she's worked hard at this.
Well,
I'm
she's getting a lot of money, too.
Actually, that's close.
Yeah, Tudor's getting a lot of money from Republicans. Tom Seraphin, thanks for being here to break down some of these important races.
Absolutely. Good to see you all.
You too. All right, let's take a live look.